Hello. In this session, we will try to understand Davison-Germer experiment as a proof of Elder-Broglie hypothesis. As you know, that the concept of wave-particle duality was introduced by Elder-Broglie. According to Elder-Broglie, each moving particle is associated with a wave nature, and the wavelength of matter that is associated with any moving object was prescribed by him was equals to lambda equals to h by p, where lambda is the wavelength, h is the Planck constant, and p is the momentum of the particle. In favor of this hypothesis, there was no experimental results or observations. An experimental verification of this famous Elder-Broglie hypothesis for the wave associated with the electrons moving in vacuum was first prescribed by these two scientists, Davison and Germer. First, we will try to understand the theoretical background of the Davison-Germer experiment. Suppose I am considering that any electron is moving in vacuum in between potential difference capital V. If so, then the kinetic energy acquired by the electron will be equals to EV, that you all know. Now from relativistic equation, we can rewrite this as E square equals to P square C square plus m0 square c to the power 4. This is Einstein's famous energy momentum relationship. Here now, instead of E, as the electron is subjected to the potential difference V, we will rewrite it as EV plus m0 c square, where m0 c square is the rest mass energy of the electron, and this p square c square in the right hand side will be as similar as before. So after solving this equation, you will be getting E square v square plus m0 square c to the power 4 plus twice EV m0 c square equals to p square c square in the right hand side plus m0 square c to the power 4. This m0 square c to the power 4 in the left hand side and right hand side, that will cancel out. However, this will not be cancelled out in this fashion. First it will go to the right hand side with a minus sign, then this will be cancelled out. I am jumping one step here and calculating directly the value of p square c square. So p square c square, that can be written as twice EV m0 c square. If I take this whole common, then within bracket I will be leaving with 1 plus E square v square divided by twice EV m0 c square, like this. So from this equation, if you now directly want to calculate the value of P, that is the momentum of the electron which is subjected to a potential difference V, you will be getting it is twice EV m0 c square, then first bracket 1 plus E square v square divided by twice EV m0 c square, this one, then bracket close, whole to the power half as it was. Then 1 by c will come all together in this side. After that we can also calculate this cancel this c square term. So finally you can write twice EV into m0, then 1 plus E square v square divided by twice EV m0 c square. No, on c square will not be there, it will also be cancelled here also. This c square cancels out. Or you can do one thing, you can this eliminate these square terms and eliminate this EV. So here it will be remaining with twice m0 c square bracket close to the power half. So I'm not interested with this calculation. I'll be more interested with the value or end result to calculate the value of the L-Broglie wavelength lambda. Lambda equals to h by p. So I can rewrite this equation, the value of lambda, as L-Broglie wavelength L-Broglie wavelength lambda, that will be equals to h by p. That means h whole divided by twice EV m0, then 1 plus EV by twice m0 c square whole to the power half. Now one simple trick I am applying here. If so that EV, this is much less than m0 c square, because m0 c square is the rest mass energy. If you imagine the value of C, it will be much greater than the value of EV. So here if you apply, this term will be so negligible. So lambda, that will be nearly equals to h divided by whole root of power of twice EV m0. What is m0? Rest mass of an electron. So now you know most of the values. You know the value of Planck constant, it is 6.62 into 10 to the power minus 34. You know the value of E, that is charge of electron, 1.6 into 10 to the power minus 19. You know the value of M in SI unit, that is 9.1 into 10 to the power minus 31. So you are only remaining with the value of V. So putting all the terms, you can write it directly as 12.28 whole root of power of V in Armstrong, as I am putting the values in SI unit. So now if I give you the value of V, that is the potential difference where the electrons is subjected with, or electron has been put inside the Coolidge tube with the potential which is maintaining the potential difference V. If the value of V, suppose I am giving 36 electron volt, so directly it will be divided by 6 and you will be getting the value of H, that is L-Broglie wavelength. But this is as per the hypothesis of L-Broglie. Now we have to see its understanding with the experiment, that how the experiment can prove or give you the exact same result which you are obtaining from L-Broglie hypothesis. If the hypothesis and real-time experiment gives you the same result, then you will be able to conclude that yes, L-Broglie hypothesis is true and it is experimentally verified. So now we will go towards the experimental section. Let us see how is the experimental arrangement. First, let me sketch the experimental it is done with the single crystal of nickel and with electron beam diffraction. Experimental setup, it is done with, as I said, it is done with electron beam diffraction and with nickel single crystal. How is the setup? The setup is very simple. First, the electron beam is being generated from electron gun. What is the setup of electron gun? You are having some electron generator here. Suppose this is the filament. The filament by thermionic emission is generating electrons. The electrons are subjected through high potential difference electric field to increase its velocity. There are multiple collimators are there which are focusing the electrons in a particular direction with high velocity, and the high velocity electron beam is incidenting on one single crystal of nickel. Suppose this is the single crystal of nickel. On this the electron beam is incidenting. Now after incidence it will be diffracted in different directions. At different directions, suppose this angle of diffraction is let it be phi. With a particular radius, I have one detector the detector can move around the nickel single crystal. Suppose this is the detector D. This detector can move around in this path, in this perimeter, and it can record the intensity of the diffracted ray in any point for any angle phi. It can be here, it can be here, it can be here, it can be here, anywhere. It can just move around in this direction, and it can record the intensity of the diffracted ray for a particular angle of diffraction. This is the simple setup. Then from that setup, we will now be plotting the polar graph to understand the intensity for different angle of diffraction phi. I will be changing the different angle of detector, and for different angle and with different potential difference maintained in between the electron gun, we will be drawing the polar graphs now. How will be the polar graphs and how the polar graphs will look like? Let me show you. Now let us see the nature of the polar graph that are drawn in different angles. First I am showing you how the polar graphs are drawn. Suppose I am drawing this polar graph for a particular potential difference V. In the polar graph, first for different angle the intensity will be plotted in form of magnitude. Suppose this is the angle of diffraction 10 degree, for that this is the unit of intensity. For 20 degree this is the unit of intensity. For 30 degree this is the unit of intensity. For 40 degree this is the unit of intensity. For 80 degree this is the unit of intensity. So the arrow sign, the magnitude of the arrow will determine, or the length of the arrows will determine the magnitude of the intensities. Angle of the arrow made with the y-axis will determine the angle of diffraction, or at the particular angle where the intensity has been recorded. After that you will erase all the arrows. Only the arrow tips will be remaining, and you will join the arrow tips. If you join the arrow tips, you will be generating a graph. That particular graph will be called a polar graph. Okay, so now I will show you the polar graphs that were recorded at different potential differences. I will be showing you at least 6 polar graphs at different potential differences recorded by the Division-Germer experiment. Suppose the polar graphs I am showing you at different potential difference 40 volt, 44 volt, then 48 volt, then 54 volt, then 60 volt, then 68 volt. At different potential differences I am trying to show you the polar graphs that were recorded from the experiment. At 40 volt the polar graph was like that. At 44 volt there was a signature of hump, little hump, and at 48 volt the signature of the hump was more prominent. At 54 volt there was a proper cleavage or hump at a particular angle. With increasing potential difference, again the hump was vanished, and finally at 68 volt the hump totally vanished. If you carefully notice the polar graphs drawn in different potential differences, you will understand that one hump was generating with increase in potential difference. The hump was prominent at an angle exactly 50 degree at 54 volt. After that the hump vanished. So now the question arises, what is the origin of the hump which was generated at 54 volt at 50 degree? The answer is, this is the indication of having L-the-Broglie wavelength at that particular potential difference. Now if so, I can easily calculate the L-the-Broglie wavelength at 54 volt, because just now I have seen the calculation. Any electron which is subjected to a potential difference V that can generate the L-the-Broglie wavelength at 12.28 divided by whole root over V in Armstrong. Just what I have to do, I have to now only put the value of V. So if I put the value of V as 54 volt, directly I will be reaching to one result, 12.28 divided by whole root of 54 in Armstrong, you'll be getting the value like 1.66 Armstrong. So if the hum originated at 54 volt is because of LW wavelength, then the LW wavelength for this particular experiment, or the LW wavelength of the electron at 54 volt, will be equals to 1.66 Armstrong. Now we have to show from another origin that really this is the cause of the LW wavelength, and as you have drawn the analogy with the potential difference maintained in the electron gun, you have to draw another analogy from the source material, that is nickel. Because now you will have a question that is, okay, fine, I'm okay with that, the result is LW wavelength, but what is the requirement of taking nickel single crystal? You have could have chosen any other single crystals also for diffraction. Yes, we could have, but nickel will give you the same result that I am going to show you now. So I'm changing my total understanding and coming back to our preliminary understanding of basic physics of crystallography. I'm considering the crystal structure of nickel. Now I know that nickel single crystal is having the lattice constant. Lattice constant of nickel lattice constant, I'm considering it as D. Lattice constant of nickel is 2.15 Armstrong, that I know. So from the consideration of lattice constant and our preliminary idea of diffraction, that is Bragg diffraction, we will try to arrive at the same result. Let me show you. Suppose I am considering these are the crystal planes of nickel, and which was on which the electron beam was incident. These are the crystal planes of nickel, and these are the atomic positions, or position of the atoms of nickel. Okay, so what is D? D is this one, lattice constant D, and the value of D we know. Now let us consider these are the crystal planes, and interplanar spacing for these planes. The interplanar spacing is interplanar spacing. How to calculate? You have to draw one perpendicular line from one plane to another plane, and it will be called the interplanar spacing. Let the interplanar spacing is D. So this is D. Let us consider. This is the assumption. So I am considering this is the interplanar spacing. Now I am considering from this direction the electron beams are culminating on the crystal plane, and it is being reflected in this direction, then deviating because of change in the refractive index. Another parallel ray from this plane is coming in this direction, again it is deviating in this direction. These are parallel, these two are parallel rays, of course. Okay, so as per my understanding, this angle 50 degree should be generated here. This should be phi, the angle between the diffracted ray and the incident ray. This is the direction of incidence, so this is the direction of incidence, this is the direction of diffraction, so this is the angle phi. Now if I consider one perpendicular line here from this plane to that plane, perpendicular line here, and consider this angle is theta and this angle is theta, of course I can write this angle is phi and this angle is twice theta by simple geometry. If you concentrate here, you can easily understand what is twice theta and what is phi. And let me give some names. Let this be Q, and I am drawing one perpendicular line from this point to that point. Let this be O. This is suppose M, and this is N. So I can write the path difference between two diffracting rays which are parallel to each other is equals to, path difference will be equals to mq plus nq. So I have to calculate this value only, and from simple geometry you can always write it as twice d cos of theta, because this is a d and this should be also d, as this interplanar spacing is small d, this is interplanar spacing, this will be small d, and of these two triangles this is 90 degree, this angle is 90 degree. You know the value of d, as this is theta and this is theta, this will be theta and this will be theta. From simple geometry you can easily write it. Now from Bragg's law of diffraction we can write the optical path difference will be equals to twice mu d cos of theta. What is mu? The refractive index. Okay, so from this angle now, this small angle, if this is capital D, this is small d, and this angle is 90 degree, this angle is 90 degree, instead of this small d you can write capital D sin theta, or you can write it directly as twice mu capital D sin of theta cos of theta. So actually we are getting mu d sin of 2 theta. This is easily understandable, I hope. Now what about the refractive index? I am applying Snell's law at this particular point. Concentrate on this particular point. At this particular point I am trying to apply Snell's law. What Snell's law says? Mu equals to sin I by sin r. So what is sin I here? Sin phi is sin I. Okay. Then sin r. Sin r equals to sin of twice theta. Okay. Put it here. If you put it here, at this point I am applying Snell's law. Okay. Sin phi by sin 2 theta. This angle is 2 theta. Angle of incidence, angle of refraction. If you do not get this point, you redraw this figure or consult any book. The figure, if the figure is prominent, simple geometry will make you understand everything. Okay, so I am getting twice. I am now putting the value of mu. If I am putting the value of mu here, I will be getting this path difference equals to sin phi divided by sin of 2 theta equals to capital D sin of 2 theta. The sin 2 theta cancels out. Finally I am getting D sin phi. According to Bragg's law of diffraction, path difference will be equals to will be equals to even multiple of lambda, or from the law of diffraction maxima also you can write it. From diffraction maxima law you can write as this will be equals to n lambda for constructive diffraction. Or diffraction maxima. Now what you have to do? For first order n equals to 1, put n equals to 1 and calculate the value of lambda, putting the value of d. You know the value of d. D is the lattice constant. You know its value. Put it here and try to calculate. You will be reaching the result 1.65 Armstrong. Now look at the beauty. From the idea of diffraction, applying Bragg's law, applying the knowledge of diffraction on single crystal, and also from the hypothesis of Hildenbroich, we are reaching at the same result, almost 1.66 Armstrong and 1.65 Armstrong, which proves the hypothesis made by Hildenbroich was true, and Hildenbroich wavelength really exists. And in the next classes we will be trying to calculate the Hildenbroich wavelength of different objects. So thank you for this session, and follow the next videos.